It was a rainy afternoon in late October when I stumbled upon Whitmore's Antiques, a quaint little shop nestled in the heart of a small New England town. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Dusty shelves lined with trinkets and relics from the past created an atmosphere both charming and eerie. "Welcome. Feel free to look around," called out Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly shop owner with kind eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. As I meandered through the aisles, my eyes caught sight of an old porcelain doll. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow me, and a chill ran down my spine. The doll was dressed in a frayed Victorian-era dress, its once white lace now yellowed with age. "Ah, I see you found Mandy," Mrs. Whitmore said, appearing beside me with an almost imperceptible smile. "She's quite the conversation piece." Intrigued, I asked, "What's her story?" Mrs. Whitmore's expression turned serious. "Mandy is an interesting one. She was found in an old farmhouse in Canada, abandoned for decades. The family who found her experienced strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, eerie laughter in the night. Eventually, they donated her to a museum, but she ended up here somehow. Against my better judgment, I decided to purchase Mandy. Little did I know, that decision would change my life forever. I placed Mandy on a shelf in my living room, feeling a strange sense of unease. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard soft whispers and the sound of footsteps. I dismissed them as my imagination running wild. Around midnight, a loud crash jolted me awake. I rushed to the living room to find Mandy lying on the floor, though she had been securely placed on the shelf. Unease turned to fear, but I convinced myself it was just the doll slipping off. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew. Lights flickered, doors creaked, and I could swear I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I tried to ignore it, but the sense of dread was palpable. Determined to find answers, I started researching haunted dolls and came across numerous accounts of similar phenomena. Mandy's story seemed to be echoed in tales from the USA, Canada, and Europe. Dolls that brought misfortune, whispered at night, and seemed to be vessels for something sinister. I reached out to locals who might have more information. One evening, I met with Professor Reed, a historian specializing in local folklore. His eyes widened when I mentioned Mandy. "You say you have Mandy? That doll has a dark history. It's said to be cursed, a conduit for restless spirits," he explained, his voice grave. The more I learned, the more I realized the severity of the situation. But nothing could prepare me for what was to come. The days following my meeting with Professor Reed were marked by an escalation in the strange occurrences at my home. What had started as whispers and shadows had grown into full-blown manifestations of paranormal activity. Objects flew across the room, the temperature dropped suddenly, and the once innocent laughter of a child turned into a menacing cackle. One particularly chilling evening, I was sitting in my study, poring over old documents about Mandy's history. Suddenly, a framed photograph of my family flew off the wall, shattering into pieces. I jumped, my heart pounding, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mandy's reflection in the window. Her glassy eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I decided it was time to seek more help. I reached out to Professor Reed again, and he suggested we visit the local museum where Mandy was supposed to have been kept before mysteriously arriving at Whitmore's Antiques. The museum curator, Mrs. Thompson, was hesitant at first but agreed to share what she knew. "Mandy was indeed part of our collection," she said, her voice trembling. But strange things began happening. Staff members fell ill, exhibits were vandalized, and we heard cries in the night. We had to get rid of her. As we delved deeper, we uncovered a startling revelation. Mandy was not just a doll but a vessel. She was once owned by a woman accused of witchcraft in the 1800s. The woman had infused her essence into the doll to escape persecution, binding her spirit to the porcelain figure. With this new information, Professor Reed and I formulated a plan. We needed to confront Mandy's spirit directly. We decided to perform a cleansing ritual, not a traditional one, but something based on historical practices we found in our research, careful to avoid any semblance of a ritualistic cliché. That night, we set up in my living room, candles lit and herbs burning to purify the space. As we began, the room grew colder, and the air seemed to thicken. Mandy's eyes gleamed in the candlelight, and an oppressive presence filled the room. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The air shimmered, and a figure began to form. A woman, her face twisted in anger and sorrow. "You cannot free me," she hissed. "I am bound to this world." But we pressed on, speaking words of peace and release, urging the spirit to find rest. The room shook, and it felt as if the very walls were closing in. Suddenly, with a final, deafening scream, the figure dissipated, and the room fell silent. For a moment, I stood there, breathless, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. Mandy sat on the table, her eyes now dull and lifeless. I decided to bury Mandy, to lay her to rest once and for all. With Professor Reed's help, we found a secluded spot in the woods. As we covered her with earth, I felt a sense of peace, a closure that had been elusive for so long. Life gradually returned to normal. The disturbances ceased, and I could finally sleep without fear. But every now and then, when the night is particularly quiet, I think I hear a faint whisper, a reminder of the dark presence that once haunted my home. Months have passed since that harrowing experience. I've resumed my normal routines, but the memory of Mandy lingers. It's a story I share cautiously, aware that some might dismiss it as mere fantasy. Yet, I know the truth of what happened. As I walk through the town, I occasionally catch a glimpse of a doll in a shop window, and my heart skips a beat. I remind myself that Mandy is gone, her spirit at rest. But in a world filled with mysteries, who's to say there aren't other dolls, other objects, waiting to be discovered? Perhaps the next encounter won't be mine, but someone else's. And maybe, just maybe, they'll be better prepared for the darkness that such a discovery can bring. I received the news on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. My Aunt Beatrice had passed away, leaving me her entire estate. It was unexpected, as we hadn't been particularly close in recent years. Still, I felt a pang of sadness as I remembered the summers spent at her old house in upstate New York, a place filled with odd trinkets and antiques. Aunt Beatrice was a recluse, a woman with a mysterious aura who kept to herself and her collection of peculiar artifacts. Her passing left me with a strange sense of both loss and curiosity. A week later, I drove up to her home, a Victorian-era relic standing solemnly at the edge of a dense forest. The house was just as I remembered, creaky, dusty, and brimming with a sense of history. The towering structure, with its ornate woodwork and ivy-covered walls, loomed over me as I approached. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and decaying wood. Memories of my childhood visits flooded back as I navigated the narrow, cluttered hallways, each room filled with relics from a bygone era. As I sifted through her belongings, I stumbled upon an old doll, tucked away in a corner of her attic. It had a porcelain face, deep-set eyes, and an unsettling smile. The doll was dressed in a faded lace dress, its once bright colors now dulled by time. Its eyes seemed to follow me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching my every move. There was something inherently disturbing about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Curiosity piqued. I decided to bring the doll home. I packed it carefully, wrapping it in an old quilt before placing it in the trunk of my car. The drive back to my house was uneventful, but I couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the doll's eyes staring back at me. Little did I know, that decision would lead me down a path of terror I could never have imagined. The doll seemed to emanate a cold aura, a silent warning of the darkness it harbored within. That night, as I placed the doll on a shelf in my living room, a sense of unease settled over me. I tried to dismiss it as mere imagination, but deep down, I felt that bringing the doll into my home was a mistake. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The doll's presence was almost palpable, a silent intruder in my home. I told myself it was just a doll, an inanimate object, but the growing sense of dread was hard to ignore. In the following days, I tried to go about my usual routine, but the doll's presence loomed large in my mind. I found myself glancing at it frequently, expecting it to move or change expressions. It remained still, its glassy eyes unblinking, but the unease persisted. I began to wonder about its history, what secrets it might hold. Aunt Beatrice had a penchant for collecting the unusual and the macabre. What had drawn her to this doll? The first few nights were uneventful. I placed the doll on a shelf in my living room, a silent guardian over my mundane life. The house was quiet, and I convinced myself that my initial fears were unfounded. But then, things began to change. Subtle at first, small noises in the dead of night, a faint rustling sound that I couldn't quite place. I attributed it to the old house settling, dismissing the noises as natural creaks and groans. I started hearing faint whispers in the dead of night, and objects would be mysteriously out of place by morning. One morning, I found a vase that had been on the mantelpiece shattered on the floor. I couldn't recall any drafts or disturbances that could have caused it to fall. Each incident seemed minor on its own, but together, they painted a picture of something sinister at play. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that an unseen presence was lurking in the shadows. I shrugged it off as my imagination, perhaps a byproduct of grief and stress. But one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard the unmistakable sound of tiny footsteps padding down the hallway. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to hear more. Silence. I told myself it was just the house, the old wooden floors creaking under the weight of time. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something I couldn't explain. Determined to find answers, I installed cameras throughout my house, hoping to catch whatever was causing these disturbances. I set up cameras in the living room, the hallway, and my bedroom, ensuring every angle was covered. Reviewing the footage the next morning, I saw nothing unusual at first. Hours of footage showing an empty house, still and silent. Then, around 2 a.m., the doll moved. Its head slowly turned to face the camera, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. The footage I reviewed the next morning sent chills down my spine. The doll had moved on its own, its head turning as if acknowledging the camera's presence. I watched in horror as the doll's eyes seemed to glow, a malevolent light flickering within them. It was unmistakable. Something was inside that doll, something that defied logic and reason. The realization that my home was haunted by this eerie presence left me both terrified and intrigued. I decided to share the footage online, hoping to find others who might have experienced something similar. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in, with some people sharing their own tales of haunted dolls and paranormal encounters. Others were skeptical, accusing me of fabricating the footage for attention. Despite the mixed reactions, the video quickly went viral, capturing the fascination of thousands. It seemed I had inadvertently stumbled into the world of the supernatural, and there was no turning back. Unable to contain my astonishment, I uploaded the video online. Within hours, it went viral. Comments flooded in, some fascinated, others skeptical. Encouraged by the response, I started documenting my experiences, posting regular updates on the eerie happenings in my home. Each night, I reviewed the footage, capturing more instances of the doll moving, objects being thrown across the room, and ghostly whispers filling the air. My follower count skyrocketed. People were captivated by the unfolding horror, eagerly awaiting the next installment of my haunted life. I began to enjoy the attention, the thrill of each new discovery, and the validation from my growing audience. The likes and comments poured in, each one reinforcing my decision to continue sharing my story. I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement, knowing that I was no longer alone in my experience. With each video, the activity seemed to escalate. Doors slammed shut on their own, lights flickered, and cold spots appeared in various rooms. My viewers were quick to point out details I had missed, adding to the sense of a shared experience. Some even suggested ways to communicate with the spirit, though I was hesitant to engage directly. The doll, once just an eerie relic, had become the centerpiece of an unfolding nightmare, one that I couldn't escape. One particularly disturbing night, I captured footage of the doll moving across the room entirely. It started on the shelf, then, over the course of an hour, it climbed down and walked across the floor. The sight of its tiny legs moving independently, its head swiveling with each step, was beyond unsettling. I posted the video immediately, and the response was explosive. It seemed everyone wanted to see the haunted doll in action. As my online presence grew, so did the haunting. I began receiving messages from paranormal enthusiasts, ghost hunters, and even journalists wanting to cover my story. I agreed to a few interviews, hoping to shed light on my experience. Each interview brought more followers, more views, and more engagement. My life was becoming consumed by the doll and its sinister influence. The thrill of fame and the allure of the supernatural were intoxicating, but they came at a cost. Despite the growing fear, I couldn't stop. The attention was addictive, and the possibility of uncovering the truth behind the doll's haunting drove me forward. I began to explore the history of haunted dolls, diving into accounts from around the world. Stories from the USA, Canada, and Europe revealed a pattern of malevolent spirits attached to dolls, bringing misfortune to their owners. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the gravity of my situation. Friends and family started to express concern. They noticed the toll the haunting was taking on me. Sleepless nights, a gaunt appearance, and a growing obsession with the doll. I brushed off their worries, convinced that I could handle it. The fame and recognition felt worth the sacrifices I was making. Little did I know the true cost was yet to be revealed. However, as the paranormal activity intensified, so did my troubles. Lights flickered constantly, the air grew icy cold, and the whispers turned into sinister laughter. I started falling ill frequently, fevers, headaches, and a sense of overwhelming fatigue. My nights were plagued by nightmares, and I began seeing shadowy figures lurking in the corners of my vision. Each day, the doll's presence seemed to grow stronger, its influence more insidious. I began documenting everything obsessively, convinced that capturing the activity would help me understand it. But the more I recorded, the more aggressive the hauntings became. Objects were no longer just moving, they were being hurled across the room with force. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me everywhere, its expression shifting subtly to one of malice. My home, once a sanctuary, had become a place of fear and dread. One evening, While reviewing the latest footage, I noticed something chilling. The doll was not alone. Shadows moved around it, indistinct but clearly there. It was as if other entities were drawn to the doll, gathering in my home. The realization that I was dealing with multiple spirits, not just one, sent a wave of panic through me. I posted the footage and the response was immediate. Viewers were horrified, urging me to get rid of the doll. Despite the mounting fear, I felt compelled to continue. The views, the comments, the attention, they were all consuming. I started to live stream my nights, sharing the terror in real time with my audience. Each night, the activity grew more intense, the spirits seemingly feeding off the energy of the viewers. The thrill of the unknown, the validation from my followers, kept me going, even as my health continued to decline. The physical and mental toll became undeniable. I was constantly exhausted, plagued by headaches and nausea. I saw doctors, but they found nothing physically wrong with me. The stress and lack of sleep were taking their toll, and I knew the doll was at the heart of it. Yet, the fame and recognition I had gained were too addictive to let go. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and validation, unable to break free. I received warnings from followers and locals alike. Stories of cursed objects and haunted dolls filled my inbox, each one more terrifying than the last. Some people shared their own experiences, urging me to seek help or get rid of the doll. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The doll had become a part of my identity, my source of fame and recognition. The thought of losing that was almost as terrifying as the hauntings themselves. As the hauntings escalated, I began to question my own sanity. The shadows I saw, the whispers I heard, were they real, or was I losing my mind? The line between reality and nightmare blurred. My home was a place of constant fear, and I was its prisoner. The once thrilling experience of capturing paranormal activity had turned into a living nightmare, one from which there seemed to be no escape. My obsession with capturing every supernatural moment took a toll. I became withdrawn, neglecting my job and my friends. My health continued to deteriorate, and my mind grew foggy, as if the doll's malevolent presence was seeping into my very being. The once vibrant connection I had with my audience began to feel like a burden. The thrill of fame had turned into a suffocating weight. One night, after another particularly intense haunting, I found myself in the kitchen, knife in hand, with no recollection of how I got there. The realization hit me hard. This doll was driving me to madness. Fame and followers were not worth my sanity. I stared at the knife, my hands trembling, and understood that I had reached my breaking point. The doll's influence had pushed me to the edge, and I needed to take drastic action. Desperate for help, I reached out to a paranormal investigator named Lucas, who had contacted me after seeing my videos. We met at a local coffee shop, and I recounted the events that had unfolded. Lucas listened intently, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. "You need to get rid of that doll, Ethan," he said firmly. "It's not just a haunted object. It's a conduit for something much darker." Despite my reservations, I agreed to let Lucas help. We devised a plan to remove the doll from my home and hopefully end the haunting. The idea of parting with the doll, the source of my fame, was terrifying, but my deteriorating health and sanity left me no choice. I knew that continuing to live with the doll was unsustainable, and the thought of regaining my peace of mind was enough to push me forward. That night, as Lucas and I prepared to remove the doll, the house seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. The air was thick with an oppressive force, and the temperature dropped sharply. The doll sat on the shelf, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. It felt as if the spirits within the house knew what we were planning and were determined to stop us. My heart pounded as we approached the doll, each step feeling like a struggle against an invisible force. As we lifted the doll, the lights flickered violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. The doll's eyes seemed to burn with fury, and I felt a cold, crushing grip around my chest. Lucas shouted over the noise, urging me to stay strong. We moved quickly, carrying the doll to my car and driving to a secluded spot in the woods. The journey felt surreal, the night air heavy with anticipation. The doll, once just an eerie relic, now felt like a ticking time bomb. We dug a deep hole, the cold earth biting at our hands. As we placed the doll in the ground, the oppressive presence seemed to intensify. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and I struggled to keep my focus. Lucas began to cover the doll with dirt, his movements quick and deliberate. The ground seemed to pulse beneath us, as if the very earth was rejecting our efforts. But we persisted, determined to see it through. As the last of the dirt covered the doll, the air suddenly cleared. The oppressive force lifted, replaced by an almost eerie calm. The silence was deafening, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting from my shoulders. We stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the reality of what we had done sinking in. The doll was buried, its malevolent presence contained, but the cost of its influence remained. For a moment, I stood there, breathless, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. The doll might be buried, but the scars it left on my mind and body were deep. I hoped that this act would be enough to free me from its grasp, but only time would tell. I decided to return home, cautiously optimistic that the worst was behind me. The house felt different, quieter, as if it was finally at peace. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, the nightmares that had plagued me dissipating. My health began to improve, and the shadows that once haunted my vision vanished. It seemed that burying the doll had indeed ended the haunting. However, the experience had left me changed. I no longer craved the attention and fame that had driven me to document my haunting. The followers, the views, the viral fame, it all seemed hollow compared to the sanity and peace I had regained. I realized that the pursuit of fame had come at a terrible cost, one that I was not willing to pay again. Reflecting on my journey, I decided to share one final video. In it, I recounted the entire experience, from discovering the doll to the terrifying hauntings and the final confrontation. I spoke candidly about the toll it had taken on my health and sanity, urging others to be cautious when dealing with the supernatural. The video was a farewell to the world of viral fame, a closure to the chapter of my life dominated by fear and darkness. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Viewers expressed their relief that I had found peace and their appreciation for sharing my story. Some even shared their own experiences, creating a sense of community and understanding. It was a stark contrast to the fear and isolation I had felt during the haunting. I realized that while fame had brought me recognition, it was the genuine connections with others that truly mattered. Months passed, and I gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. My health continued to improve, and the nightmares ceased entirely. The videos of my haunting remained online, a testament to the ordeal I had endured. Occasionally, new viewers would stumble upon them, reigniting the fascination with the haunted doll. But I had moved on, finding solace in the simple, quiet life I had reclaimed. The experience left me with a profound understanding of the dangers of sacrificing one's sanity for fame. The allure of recognition and validation had driven me to the brink of madness, but in the end, it was my sanity and well-being that truly mattered. I learned to appreciate the quiet moments, the peace of mind that came from living free of fear. The doll might have been a conduit for darkness, but it also taught me a valuable lesson about the true cost of fame. Months have passed since that harrowing experience. I've resumed my normal routines, but the memory of the doll lingers. It's a story I share cautiously, aware that some might dismiss it as mere fantasy. Yet, I know the truth of what happened. The haunted doll, with its malevolent presence, had left an indelible mark on my life, one that would not easily fade. As I walk through the town, I occasionally catch a glimpse of a doll in a shop window, and my heart skips a beat. I remind myself that the doll is gone, its spirit at rest. But in a world filled with mysteries, who's to say there aren't other dolls, other objects, waiting to be discovered? The thought sends a shiver down my spine, a reminder of the dark journey I once undertook. Perhaps the next encounter won't be mine, but someone else's. And maybe, just maybe, they'll be better prepared for the darkness that such a discovery can bring. The haunted doll taught me that some stories are better left untold, some mysteries better left unsolved. The allure of fame and recognition might be tempting, but the cost of one's sanity is too high a price to pay. In the end, I found peace not in the fame I had gained, but in the quiet moments of solitude and reflection. The doll was gone, but the lessons it imparted remained. I learned to cherish the simple joys of life, the moments of calm and tranquility. The haunting might have ended, but the journey of healing and self-discovery had just begun. Thank you for watching our stories. Did you enjoy it? What do you think could have happened next? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more stories based on real-life events, click on the video appearing on your screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. See you in the next video.